And you're sure you'll be able to make the rent?
Yeah, I'll make it work.
A girl named Eloise Turner is dancing in her homemade dress. She is a fan of 60s fashion and dreams of becoming a clothing designer. Ellie accidentally drops a photograph of her mother, who passed away long ago. For a moment, the girl thought she saw her in the mirror. The grandmother calls Ellie and hands her a letter from the university with the answer. The girl was over the moon with happiness, learning that she's going to London. It was her most cherished dream. In the evening, Ellie packed her things. The grandmother is very proud of her granddaughter, but asks her to be careful. Ellie's mother once went to London too, but it turned out to be nothing like she had imagined. Ellie promised that everything would be alright, and in the morning after saying goodbye to her grandmother, she set off on the journey. Upon arriving in London, she called a taxi. The girl was in euphoria and full of enthusiasm. But she became worried when the driver started making dirty hints at her. Ellie panicked and asked the driver to stop the car. She went into a store to wait for the man to leave. At the entrance of the dormitory, a guy noticed her and offered to help with her things, but Ellie refused. She met her roommate named Jocasta, who immediately offered her wine. Jocasta, who behaved very loosely, immediately understood that Ellie was a provincial girl. She honestly admitted that she lost her mother many years ago.
Well, I knew we'd find some common ground eventually.
Jocasta introduced Ellie to their groupmates. She didn't like how these girls were asking her personal questions, including about her mother. But she still answered that the mother was mentally ill and voluntarily departed from life. Ellie felt uncomfortable. The girls were drinking and planning to have fun all night, celebrating their arrival in Soho. The company went to a bar. Ellie doesn't want to be there and goes to the bathroom. She heard her new acquaintances go into the next stall and started saying nasty things about her, calling boring and strange. Ellie left the bar feeling upset. She realized that her grandmother was right. This city was nothing like she had imagined. Ellie's attention was caught by a strange older man coming out of the pub. Ellie couldn't sleep because Jocasta brought some guy. Ellie left the shared room. The students threw a noisy party in the dormitory. A certain guy got to the girl, but John stood up for her. They had already met before, at the dormitory and at the bar. Ellie made it clear that she wasn't interested in socializing and fell asleep right on the couch. On the first day of class, she overslept and barely made it to the lecture. Jocasta and her friends laughed at the girl. During the break, Ellie called her grandmother, lying that everything was fine. An announcement about renting a room only for women caught her attention. Ellie immediately called the homeowner and went to the address. The door was opened by an old woman named Alexandra Collins. The house was gloomy and quiet. Miss Collins explained the rules. Smoking is prohibited here, as well as bringing men here after 8 in the evening. The interior of the room was very old-fashioned, but Ellie was satisfied with everything. The most important thing for her was peace and quiet, so she gladly agreed to rent the room. Ellie settled in the new place and turned on the record player, fantasizing about how great it was here in the 60s. Soon Ellie fell asleep, having a wonderful dream. She found herself in London in the 60s. It used to be the center of the universe here. Ellie went to a nightclub and saw in the reflection instead of herself a beautiful blonde girl, who looked very confident. Suddenly Ellie and the girl switched places. Now Ellie is watching what is happening from the outside. The girl named Sandy came out to the guests, dreaming of conquering this world. An older man immediately became interested in her, but Sandy said she would only talk to the club owner. She approached the bartender, asking him to call the main one. Sandy said she wanted to sing on stage at their elite club. The bartender advised her to talk to Jack first, who could help. Sandy looked at herself in the mirror to make sure she looked stunning. Jack really liked her boldness and persistence. Sandy immediately made it clear that nothing would stop her on the way to success. To prove her talent, Sandy invited Jack to dance. It was as if Ellie was reliving the whole experience with her. Jack, conquered by the blonde's beauty, appointed her an audition. They were going to leave the bar together. The older man, annoyed by the beauty's refusal, insulted her. Jack didn't like that, and in front of all the guests, he attacked the man and then took Sandy's hand. They ran away together, and alone, they kissed. Ellie felt the same way. Jack offered Sandy a ride home. He promised his new acquaintance a bright future on stage. Before Sandy left, Jack said he would pick her up tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Sandy came home, to the same room where Ellie currently lives. The girl went to bed. When Ellie tried to touch her, she immediately woke up. Inspired by Sandy's image, Ellie made sketches. John liked them very much. Jocasta, who never missed a chance to tease the quiet girl, noticed the marks on her neck. Ellie immediately remembered her dream. Jocasta of course told everyone what she had seen. Ellie looked in the mirror for a long time. After her unusual adventure, she feels much more confident. John noticed that she had changed and suggested to go somewhere together in the evening, But Ellie said she already had plans. As she goes to sleep, she eagerly awaits the continuation of her amazing dream. That night, Jack as promised picked up Sandy and took her to another club where she would have the audition. Sandy took the stage and sang for Jack and his companion. Ellie was an invisible listener. She sincerely admired the girl, wishing to become more like her. It seemed that the men were impressed by Sandy's vocal abilities. She can't believe that success comes so easily to her. Jack promised Sandy to help her become a star of the stage. They kissed, and later in Sandy's room, indulged in passion. At that moment, Ellie woke up. On the same day, she completely changed her image, becoming more self-confident. Ellie decided to sew the exact same dress as Sandy's. The teacher found her idea very promising and praised the student. In an antique store, Ellie bought a coat similar to the one Sandy wore. Unexpectedly, Ellie recognized this place. Across from the store, she saw the bar from her dream. To earn money, Ellie decided to work as a bartender. The girl caught the attention of silver-haired gentleman whom she had seen before. Agreeing on the job, Ellie was about to leave, but silver-haired gentleman caught up with her. He said that Ellie reminded him of someone. The girl didn't want to continue the conversation and left. Ms. Collins didn't recognize Ellie right away in her new look. She loves that the girl prefers the fashion and music of the 60s. Ellie fell asleep in anticipation of new adventures of Sandy. She found herself among the audience watching the show. Ellie immediately realized that something was wrong. Seeing Sandy on stage with other provocatively dressed women, she felt disappointed and hurt for her friend. Ellie didn't want to stay here anymore and left, and later saw Sandy in the dressing room. She was crying. This clearly was not the life that the girl had dreamed of. Ellie really wanted to comfort her. Suddenly, angry Jack knocked on the door, saying that the party was not over yet, so Sandy had to come out to the guests. Ellie shared all of the girl's sufferings. Men were waiting for them at the table. One of them clearly hinted to Sandy that he wouldn't mind being alone with her. Jack didn't mind at all. Sandy left the table, saying she wouldn't do it. But according to Jack, all the girls who wanted to perform on stage went through this. Sandy hurried to leave. More than anything, Ellie wants to take the girl away from here. She got lost among a dozen rooms, hearing Jack's voice demanding that she come back. Suddenly Ellie found herself in her room. Sandy was lying on the bed and crying, and there was money on the bedside table. That same older man came out of the shower. Ellie screamed at him not to dare touch Sandy. Suddenly Ellie woke up from this nightmare. She couldn't come to her senses and thought about Sandy all day. In a burst of emotion, she began to tear apart the dress she was sewing. The teacher stopped her, saying that doubts are absolutely normal. In the evening, John came to Ellie in the pub to see her. He noticed that the girl was very upset during the day. After receiving a call from her grandmother, Ellie went outside, leaving the drawing with Sandy. From her voice, the grandmother immediately understood that something was wrong. Ellie confessed that she had moved out of the dormitory and gotten a job. Ellie's nervous state was noticed by silver-haired gentleman who said he was used to knowing all about the pretty girls in the area. Before leaving, the man handed Ellie the drawing. Eloise began to believe she was haunted by Sandy's restless spirit. At night, Ellie couldn't sleep for a long time. Suddenly the gramophone turned on by itself. Jack burst into the room and grabbed the girl, ordering her to entertain the guests. Sandy looks apathetic. A man immediately became interested in the girl and asked for her name. She answered that her name was Alexandra. Sandy is dancing. To drown out the pain, she drinks a lot. It helps her forget and not think about her unfulfilled hopes. One day Sandy was met by a handsome man who said she didn't belong here. The man, whose name was Lindsay, assured that he wanted to help her. Sandy no longer knows who to believe. Ellie began knocking on the mirror and calling out to her friend. When Ellie broke the glass, she immediately woke up. Looking at the ceiling, Ellie saw the same room. Sandy was waiting for another client. This stranger resembled a sinister ghost. Ellie hears the voices of dozens of men. Looking in the mirror, she saw Sandy in her place. The ghost, constantly changing its appearance, approached. In a panic, Ellie ran out of the room. When she opened the door, the illusion disappeared. It was already morning. As soon as Ellie looked back into the room, she saw dozens of ghosts and screamed. The girl is afraid to return home, so she sat in the campus until evening. When John invited her to a Halloween party, she agreed without hesitation. Jocasta approached them, offering drinks. Today Ellie was going to forget, but in the midst of the fun she saw the men from her vision. Ellie was in a panic, realizing that reality had mixed with a dream. Nearby she saw Sandy, who was being watched by Jack. Ellie tries to call Sandy, but suddenly the illusion disappears. Ellie panicked and ran out of the bar, still seeing ghosts of the past. John caught up with her, asking what happened. Ellie said she didn't want to become like her mother and kiss John. Despite Ms. Collins' prohibition, She invited the guy to her place. The young people tried to behave quietly so as not to wake Miss Collins. They were going to indulge in passion when suddenly Ellie saw in the reflection on the ceiling Jack threatening Sandy. She begged the man not to touch Sandy. John didn't understand what was going on. Ellie became a witness to a terrible scene. Miss Collins, who was awakened by the noise, knocked on the door. Scared, John was about to leave, while Ellie saw with her own eyes Jack attacking Sandy. Miss Collins drove John away. Ellie watched in horror as Sandy stopped moving. She thought Sandy passed away. The next day, Ellie cleaned up the mess in the room and apologized to Miss Collins, promising that it would never happen again. She also asked if a girl named Sandy ever lived in that room. Miss Collins avoided answering. Creepy visions continued to haunt Ellie. Despite everything, she came to class, not daring to look John in the eyes. When a model tried on the dress, Ellie saw Sandy in her place and ran away in a panic. She was surrounded by the ghosts of men. Ellie ran down the street, but the ghosts of the past continued to haunt her. Silver-haired gentlemen from the pub noticed this. Reality merged with illusions. Ellie went to the police station and told them about what happened last night. Of course, the officer thought she was crazy. Ellie continues to insist on her point. She believes that the strange old man from the pub is Jack, and he is responsible for what happened to Sandy in the mid-60s. Ellie feels like she's going crazy. She realized that the police wouldn't help her. To her surprise, a female officer promised to do something for her, but she needed more data, such as Sandy's surname. Ellie immediately went to the archive, presenting her student ID. She searched for information on all the women who had gone missing in the 1960s. Ellie spent many hours studying the materials when suddenly John called out to her. He wants to understand what is happening and help her, even if everyone thinks she is crazy. Ellie decided to tell him everything that had happened to her recently. Even in the library, the ghosts continued to haunt Ellie. They seem to want something from her, repeating that she knows where to find them. Ellie attacked Jocasta, thinking she was one of these ghosts. The frightened student ran for security. Seeing Sandy through the window, Ellie ran away and followed the girl. The past and present merged. Ellie was being grabbed by hundreds of hands. When the girl caught up with Sandy, she pushed her. Ellie lost consciousness. Waking up, she followed the man to the pub. The girl only now realized that she was late for work. Silver-haired gentleman ordered a drink. Ellie was sure he was Jack. She asked him directly about Sandy. The man admitted he knew her. The man also said that he had been keeping an eye on many girls in the area. Ellie couldn't take it anymore and declared that she knew the truth. The man didn't quite understand what she meant. In his opinion, Sandy was to blame for her own fate. He didn't want to continue the conversation and left. Ellie ran after him, continuing to accuse him of what happened to Sandy. When the man walked out onto the street and was distracted by Ellie, he didn't notice a car on the road. Shocked, Ellie learned from the pub owner that the man's name was not Jack, but Lindsay. He was a retired police officer. At that moment, Ellie remembered the man who wanted to help Sandy. In tears, Ellie called her grandmother, not knowing who else to turn to. The girl was planning to return home right away and asked John to drive her. Ellie returned to Mrs. Collins to inform her of her departure and collect her belongings. Mrs. Collins looked friendly and offered the girl some tea. She said that the police had visited her today and told about Ellie's wild story, who claimed that a crime had taken place in that very room. Ms. Collins admitted that it was partly true. At that moment, Ellie realized with horror that Alexandra Collins was Sandy. In her youth, she had suffered from men and tried to forget the face of each one. But one day Sandy made John, who had stolen her dreams, pay for everything. Sandy got her revenge, but didn't stop there. She came to settle scores with each of those men. The newspapers wrote that they were missing, but in reality Sandy hid them under the floor and in the walls. And now Alexandra had to get rid of the only witness. Ellie guessed that the woman had put something in her tea. The girl began to lose consciousness. Suddenly the doorbell rang. Sandy's cigarettes caused a fire. At the doorstep stood John, who was worried about his friend. Sandy let him into the house and wounded him, then went after Ellie. The past was mixed up with the present again. Ellie saw young Sandy coming straight at her. Ellie dodged the blows as a fire raged around them. In the end, Ellie pushed Sandy down the stairs and ran into the room, locking the door. The ghosts of the men were breaking through the walls and grabbing Ellie. Sandy came into the room and saw all those whom she had taken the life of. Jack said she wanted it herself and slapped her. In the reflection, Sandy saw herself young. Despite everything, Ellie felt sorry for Sandy, realizing she didn't want this fate. But Sandy, who didn't want to be saved, ordered her to leave. The fire was spreading. Ellie came for injured John, who was unconscious. At that moment the rescuers broke into the house. Sandy stayed in the burning room. Ellie was taken away in an ambulance. Closing her eyes, she thought about Sandy. Some time passed. At the fashion show, Eloise Turner presented a fashionable collection of 60s dresses that she modeled. The audience applauded. The grandmother and John were most proud of her. In the last shot, we see Ellie looking in the mirror and seeing Sandy there, winking at her. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel not to miss more exciting new products. Also, the authors will be pleased if you leave your opinion in the comments.